Item 5.01, we have presentation, Maryland report card data.
All right. I am really excited about this report. And as you all know, last year when we did this presentation, we did it in a board workshop. We wanted to move this into a presentation that we would do during the actual board meeting, because this ultimately will be the beginning of how we will do these annual updates to the school board. As we finish our strategic plan and we build out a scorecard, the goal is to have a scorecard that will also really be able to show everybody the type of progress that we're making. So we are excited, and I'll pass it over to Jason Dykstra and his team to take us through this presentation.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Silkworth, Ms. Frank, members of the board, Dr. Bedell. For the record, my name is Jason Dykstra. I'm the Chief Accountability Officer here in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. I will let my amazing, awesome colleagues introduce themselves as well.
Good evening. Michelle Hall, the Accountability Data Administrator for Arundel, Annapolis, Crofton, Meade, and South River clusters.
Good evening. Anna Harding, also an Accountability Data Administrator. I have the pleasure of serving the schools in the Broadneck, Glen Burnie, Severna Park, Southern, as well as the Educational Options Cluster.
Hello, I'm Melissa Sauter. I'm also a Data Administrator in Accountability, and I support the Chesapeake, North County, Northeast, and Old Mill clusters.
And they are amazing. So I'll start with the bad news. We don't have artwork for you. We do have a lot of data for you, but you can't follow artwork. It's like, it's not possible.
I want the other Dykstra.
Done. Hang on. So we really are excited to be here tonight. Probably it will be very obvious, but we love this stuff. We really do. And it's really great to serve under Dr. Bedell, who equally loves this stuff. He can't wait to get his hands on these reports. So we really appreciate that. We're going to take some time with you today and go over the ESSA kind of accountability system. It's required by federal law. It's also required by state law. And so before we get started, we have a lot of acronyms in education. And so you're going to see some acronyms throughout our presentation. And we just want to give you a second, kind of review that list here for a second, because you will see some of these acronyms throughout our presentation. So just a quick reminder for everybody. So many of those don't exactly roll off the tongue. I'm going to just highlight two of them for you. One of the things that's really unique about the Maryland Accountability System and the Maryland Report Card is the fact that it has both criterion referenced and norm referenced data. So, that's really interesting and fairly unusual if you look at other state accountability systems. So sometimes schools are kind of judged or scored based on how a student does against other students. And sometimes the school is getting points, if you will, on the report card because it's going against a set standard. And so that's, again, something kind of unique to Maryland. The other one I want to really focus your attention on is the last one there, FAY. It's full academic year. And so I bring that to your attention because when we go over the different components in the Maryland accountability system, what you're going to notice is we may test all students, okay, but that doesn't mean that every student counts on a report card. And that's really important. So I just want to bring that one to your attention as we kind of move forward. So let's dig in a little bit. Probably obvious to everybody here, this is a requirement. Maryland has a pretty long history of testing, a pretty long history of having policies and regulations around an accountability system. And we certainly know that in Dr. Bedell's post-entry plan, we really want every student to belong, grow, and succeed. Well, there's a lot of room in this report card for students to grow and succeed. And you will see that as we go through this report card. So there hasn't been a lot of continuity with ESSA for a couple of big reasons. We started this journey in 2017-18. So we had 2 report cards before we hit COVID. Then we had 2 years of waivers where there were no report cards at all, appropriately so. We did test, however, even though we didn't get a report card, the federal government didn't let us off the hook for testing. We didn't have to test in the spring, but we did have to test that fall. And so we did have to give a test. It was not the normal test. It was a shorter version of the test, a slightly different format. But we did have to give that test, but it wasn't part of a report card. And then the last year, the report card that we received had 4 major adjustments that we're going to highlight for you all. Think of it as a curve, because that's what it was. And then now we're kind of back to normal, right? Whatever normal is, we're back there for 22-23. And so when we talk about that, we're really going to kind of talk about it as our new baseline, because hopefully now we can get back to the continuity that we want for school report cards. So I think you guys are familiar. We kind of coined this in Anne Arundel County. We use a schoolhouse as an analogy to try to understand all the different components of the ESSA accountability system. There's a lot to it. And so this, just for your reference, we kind of look at things through a school quality lens, school progress, English learners, and then ultimately performance. And so you'll see that color coding throughout the presentation. Again, it's just to try to help you understand all the different metrics that kind of go into this. So on your left, you're going to see the ESSA schoolhouse for elementary schools and middle schools. And on the right, you will see the ESSA schoolhouse for high schools. And you'll notice that, they're pretty similar, but they're not exactly the same. And so what you'll notice is really 2 distinct changes. One, in elementary and middle school, the highest room with the most points is the growth room. It's green and it's 25%. Well, we want all of our elementary school and middle school students growing. That's wonderful, and that's why the state gave it the most weight. The reason we can calculate growth in elementary schools and middle schools is because students take the state test every year. So we can measure how they do from year to year. In high schools, however, they only take a state test once. So there's really no way to do growth. So rather than growth, if you look on the right-hand side in the green level of the schoolhouse, you will see graduation rate and on-track 9th grade. 2 things, graduation rate's been around since the end of time. We've always monitored it, right? It's 15 points, and then on-track 9th grade. So while we don't have growth at high school, we do have 2 things that are very, very important for all high schools. And then what you'll also notice is different is on the high school schoolhouse, the very top is the one with the most points. That's where we really want to see students shine with respect to testing. So that room is worth 30%. So again, very similar, but there's a couple of notable differences when we look at those school report cards. So buckle up. I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleagues, and we're going to take you through the house and review all of the metrics in the ESSA house.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Dykstra. So we will start at the first floor of the house, where we say we'll lay the foundation with students for their academic success. So these are school quality metrics. The first measure in the school quality section is chronic absenteeism. It's 15% for each level, elementary, middle, and high school, and it's all calculated the same way. Points are awarded based on the number of students who were not chronically absent. And just to clarify, chronically absent, being not chronically absent means you are in attendance more than 90% of the days you are enrolled. To note, this was calculated on a curve, as Mr. Dykstra mentioned, in 21-22, so that the scores on the current 22-23 report card are back to the metrics prior to COVID. The second measure in school quality is the Maryland School Survey, which surveys students in grades 5 through 11 and educators in school buildings. This is worth 10% of a school's overall score at all 3 levels, 7 points for the students component, and 3 points for the educators component. It measures student and educator perceptions of safety, environment, community, and relationships in the school building. The third measure in the school quality room is access to a well-rounded curriculum. Think about, is it on their report card? Do they have access to these options? For this room, it is worth 10 points, but it is different for each level as indicated on the next slide. So for the elementary school, A school will receive points for the percent of fifth grade students enrolled in science and social studies and fine arts and physical education and health. They have to be enrolled in all 5. In the middle school level, it's the percent of 8th grade students enrolled in one of each at some time during middle school: fine arts and PE, and health and computational learning. And at the high school level, a school will receive points for the percentage of graduating seniors that were at some point enrolled in an AP or IB course, were duly enrolled in an AACPS high school and college level course, such as one at AACC, or were enrolled in a CTE course at the concentrator level. If the student is a certificate-bound student, then they need to be enrolled in a general education core or elective class in order to get awarded points for that section.
All right, moving on up the house. In the green second level of the schoolhouse, affectionately referred to as school progress, you'll notice some differences between the elementary middle school metrics as compared to the high school metrics. So we'll begin with high school. The on-track 9th grade is worth 5 points in the total high school house. It is calculated by taking the percentage of first-time 9th graders enrolled in the full academic year, Faye girl, Faye, who have earned at least 4 credits in any of the 5 designated subjects: math, English, science, social studies, or world language. The high school house also includes a unique measure as compared to elementary and middle schools. They have graduation rate, a 15-point room, 10 of which are allotted to the 4-year graduation rate, and 5 points allotted towards the 5-year graduation rate. For the 22-23 school report cards, these rates are reflective of the first-time 9th graders who entered in 18-19. So this data is lagging due to the need to have both the 4-year and the 5-year graduation rate for the report card. As Mr. Dykstra referred to earlier, the growth room only exists for elementary and middle schools, as it requires 2 consecutive years of scores. So bear with me as I geek out a little bit on math. I'm a previous math teacher here. So the room is 25 points, split evenly between math and ELA, 12.5 each. For the 22-23 school year, the 4th through 8th grade students who were enrolled in the full academic year were compared to any student in the state who had the same exact scale score in 21-22. The percent of students that an individual did better than is labeled a student growth percentile. Hang with me, you okay? A school's growth score is the median of all of the individual student growth percentiles, and that's translated through an assigned score table. This is drastically different than how they did growth in 21-22, where the state compared students' proficiency levels, which are a 1, 2, 3, or 4, from the fall of 21 to the spring of 22, the same school year, and then assessed the school's average growth and applied a percentile formula. Very different. The last room of the green second level of the schoolhouse is credit for well-rounded curriculum, a 10-point room for elementary and middle school, and a 5-point room for high school. So you heard Mrs. Hall explain the access to a well-rounded curriculum room. The best way to think about that purple room is what is on the student's schedule. This room, credit for a well-rounded curriculum, is like asking, what did they get on their report card? So for elementary, 5 of the 10 points are the percent of 5th graders who pass all their social studies, fine arts, PE, and health. Those are ands between all of them. They have to pass all 4 of those areas. And then the remaining 5 points are the percent of 5th graders who pass MESA, the MCAP science assessment. For middle school, 3 of the 10 points are the percent of 8th graders who pass all their math, ELA, social studies, and science courses. They have to pass all 4. In addition to the other 7 points, which are the percent of 8th graders who pass the MESA, MCAP science assessment, that's 3.5, and the MSSA for the 3.5 social studies MCAP assessment. 22-23 is the first year that the MCAP social studies assessment was factored into the ESSA report card for middle schools. The high school Credit for well-rounded curriculum is the percent of graduating seniors who receive a proficient score for the test listed on the slide, or met UMD entry requirements, which is a large percentage of our students, and they do so by taking 2 years of a world language and math courses through Algebra 2, or receive a CTE apprenticeship certification, or a seal of biliteracy. And students in the ACC program contribute positively towards this room if they achieve employment or supported employment, post-secondary education, training, or other services integrated into the curriculum. So again, notice the or for high school and the ands for elementary and middle school.
To be a part of the English Learner Proficiency Room, a student must have 2 WIDA access scores in the last 3 years, one of which was from the 22-23 administration. There are 3 ways to earn points in this room. The first is that a student will earn a score of 4.5 or higher and be exited from the program. The other ways schools can earn points are by students showing progress in their English proficiency based on their initial score, growth from the previous administration, and how many years they have been in the English Learner Program. To be a part of the MCAP Performance Room, a student had to be enrolled at a school for the full academic year. I'm not as funny as Ms. Harding. In elementary and middle schools, this room is worth 20 points. Math and English language arts are worth 10 points each. Both contents are divided into 2 measures, percent proficient and the performance index. Percent proficient is the percentage of students who earned a 3 or a 4 on the MCAP assessment. The performance index is determined by taking all the performance levels, 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, and averaging them together. These measures are calculated the same way for both math and English language arts. In high school, the room is worth 30 points, 15 points for math, and 15 points for English language arts. The premise of those calculations is the same, but there were some differences. For high school math, the percent proficient also includes SAT scores. However, because the SAT doesn't score using 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, as MCAP does, SAT scores cannot be used to calculate the performance index. So it was calculated using very few students, in some cases as few as 10 or 15 students. The ELA scores were calculated using scores from the MCAP taken in that early fall administration Mr. Dykstra talked about in the year 21-22. In 22-23, the scores of seniors were used, but in 21-22, the scores of juniors were used. This means predominantly the same students were used 2 years in a row for high school performance.
So when we look at the 21-22 report card versus the 22-23 report card, you might come to a conclusion that's kind of apples and oranges, and it really is. So just to highlight on one slide the actual changes from 21-22 to 22-23. As Ms. Hall pointed out, the chronic absenteeism points chart is back to the original, right? So there's no curve. So think of taking a final exam. One teacher decides to curve it. That's to everybody's benefit. And then the next teacher doesn't. Typically, you don't do as well without a curve. And that certainly was true with the points that we saw across the board. In fact, we know that about a little over 2/3 of our decrease in points was directly attributable to the chronic absenteeism change. So we've kind of looked at that a little bit. The second biggest change that Ms. Harding referenced is the growth calculation. We're back to using scale scores, which are much more discerning versus just 4 levels, right? If a student goes from a 1 to a 1, you get a point. Well, that's a lot different than looking at a scale score across the entire state. So it was much harder this year to show growth than it was last year. Again, think of a curve, harder to get points this year. What do we know about new state tests? It's pretty simple. We don't do real well in the beginning, right? We get better over time. That's been true with every state test that I've been associated with, and I started under the Maryland Functional Math Test. So I've been around to see them all. And we did, the first year a test comes out, we know that the scores are not as good as what we would like, but we certainly know that they go in the right direction. We had a new social studies test. And again, there wasn't a lot of points to be had there. And then as Ms. Souter just described to you, basically for our high school report cards, they used the same students. And those students were basically waived out of math and took a very shortened version of English 10, 2 or 3 years ago. And so it really wasn't very accurate. They really didn't have a chance to improve their score because the state used the exact same students because of COVID and the interruptions of testing with COVID. So that will, of course, get better. So the conclusion is pretty simple. We should not be comparing 21-22 report card to the 22-23 report card. Can we learn from both? Absolutely, we did. But we shouldn't be comparing them. We should be using them for the data that we have to make sure that we're moving forward, recognizing the context and the changes. All of this data is public. It's available on the MSDE website. There's lots and lots of information on it. Of course, they do not use the ESSA schoolhouse that we use as an analogy, but all of the same information is there. All the rooms, the levels, everything is in there. It's very complete. And some of the higher level stuff that you will find is the star rating for the all schools by level. Okay. One of the neat things that they do put on the Maryland report card is your percentile rank. They do that by level. And so in this particular example, you'll see that the percentile rank was 72. And basically what that tells the school and the school community is that school did better than 72% of all the schools in that level. And again, they keep elementary with elementary, middle with middle, and high with high. And then they, of course, give you your overall kind of report card score. How many points and what percent did you get on the report card, given all those different rooms and all those different components and metrics in the report card. And then they'll go on and break that down by student group. They'll show you whether there was an improvement, whether you hit your target. And again, there's lots and lots of information around how a school did on the MSDE website. Quick reminder about how stars work. The kind of the cut scores are 75, 60, 45, and 30. We certainly want everybody to be 3 stars or higher and moving in the right direction. And so you might ask, well, how did we do? Here's how we did. Not too bad. Again, not comparing, but just kind of putting it out there. So about 89% of our schools were 3 stars or higher. The state was 80, so we were certainly above the state. We did have 3 schools improve their star rating in a year that's really hard to do that when last year was curved. This year's not, and they still improved. Pretty impressive. That was Annapolis, Van Bachlen, and Phoenix Academy. And I'm proud to tell you that Annapolis Elementary School was the only school in the state to improve by 2 stars. Fairly remarkable. So let's dig into some of the data. There's going to be a lot of numbers on here, but what I want to do is just kind of give you a quick picture as to how did we do when we look at other districts, right? How did we do when we look at so each column on this chart is kind of representative of each level of the schoolhouse. And then what we have highlighted for you is where's Anne Arundel, and we kind of showed you last year's rank versus this year's rank. Okay, because everybody had the same curve last year and everybody did not have a curve this year. And as you can see, when we look at elementary schools, we lost a little ground. The good news is we're still within about 5 points of being in the top 5 in the state. So we're not far off when you look at the distribution of points with respect to elementary schools. When we look at middle schools, a little better. We improved a little bit. We went from 9th in the state to 8th in the state. And what's nice about this is we're within 2 points of being in the top 5 in the state. So we're right there. High schools, we lost a little ground again, but we are within 4 to 5 points of being in the top 5. And again, I'll remind you that with high schools, we have that lagging data where we use the same students and some of those ends, as Ms. Souter said, some of the numbers of kids that even contribute to a report card were very small due to the COVID waivers. That will get better over time. We're actually going to show you a little bit of that data here in just a second. So you might be curious, where did we get points? Where did we not get points? And so what we did is we kind of broke it down by level. We color coded it and we looked at kind of the floors of the schoolhouse. And so what you can see here is a couple of things. Number one, our elementary schools and middle schools do very well with that first floor of the ESSA schoolhouse, right? That school quality and student success. They're getting a lot of points there. Our high schools do really well with getting points for graduation rate and on track for 9th grade. They do very well there. But you will see that there's a lot of points to be gained and earned in the future when we look at our English learners at the middle school and high school level. So again, you can kind of see where do we get points, where do we not get points, and where do we get the most points, and where do we get the least points. And so it's kind of a nice summary when you use the ESSA schoolhouse kind of analogy and model. So let's look at testing. You can tell from all the different components that testing plays a large role in the overall school report card for the accountability system. So let's take a look at this. So on the left, you'll see English language arts, and on the right, you'll see math, and we put both years, okay? And so what you're going to see is we actually did a little bit better than we did last year for performance, but we tied. We didn't move rankings in any way, but we did do a little bit better overall on the MCAP ELA test. We also did a little bit better on the elementary math MCAP, but we lost a little ground. So we did better, but we lost a little ground. So performance improved, but not as much as some of our counterparts. When we look at middle school, you'll see a similar trend. We did better, more students passed the test, but we lost ground from across the state. And you'll see the same in mathematics, where we had improvements, but we lost one spot when we look at our other competing districts. High school, different story. So this is, and I'm going to do two things here. So this is the students in high school who took MCAP in the spring. So if we look, we can see that we did better on the English 10 test, and we improved our ranking in the state, and our high school students did better on Algebra 1 fairly significantly, and we jumped up to number 2 in the state. I want to remind you, Ms. Sauter told you, the ESSA report card is based on senior performance. So the good news is we know we have the lagging data that the high schools will be using moving forward is better, much better, because these scores will impact future report cards because of the lagging data that we use, right? So these test scores were any test takers in high school from last spring. The results were better. We did better, and that's going to help our high school report cards, just not for 22-23, right? So it's going to be moving forward that we'll get the benefit of some of that improvement because of the lagging data. So you can see we had some successes. We improved our performance. That's certainly what we want to do. We did lose a little ground, but we need to maintain that improvement. Our district rankings, as you saw, did improve at the high school level, and that will bear fruit here in a couple of years on the report card. Very proud of the fact that 89% of our schools are 3, 4, and 5-star schools, and we already highlighted that 3 of our schools improved in a year that was actually pretty tough to improve. Last thing to note, probably obvious, given the curve and the curve going away, it would have been easy for a lot more schools to have lost ground, and we didn't have that. We know that lots of our schools actually improved in other rooms, and as a result of that, they didn't lose ground, and that was great to see. I'll give you an example. We had an elementary school that actually improved their chronic attendance. That's what we all want, and that, in fact, they improved pretty well, but they still lost points on the report card because of the change of the table. Think about that. They worked hard. They improved their chronic attendance rate, the percent of students not chronically absent. They improved. That's what we want. We want schools getting better over time, but because of the curve, the lack of the curve, they actually still lost some points on the report card, and they're moving in the right direction. So that's why we really have to be very careful when we're looking at 21-22 versus 22-23. We are treating it as baseline data, just like MSDE, just like Dr. Wright's press release. We are planning on using this report card as baseline data as we develop the scorecard for the new strategic plan. And that is absolutely the right thing to do. We have some opportunities. We've already kind of talked about that we need to look at how we're supporting our English learners at the middle school and high school level. We certainly think Blueprint is going to help us with that, with the money following the student. English learners are a very important component. We have work groups working on that right now with what we're going to do with respect to Blueprint, the funding, and what are the opportunities to support those students. we're all extremely excited about the new Reveal math curriculum. We know that that's going to pay dividends, and we're equally as excited, probably should have put it on here, the science of reading curriculum for next year. We'll tell you that chronic attendance hurt us on the curve when we got off the curve, but I want to share some great news, some pretty amazing news by statistical estimations. We're about 8% better right now than we were last year. That's a lot. That's not a little. It's hard to move attendance, and that's really significant. If we can hold on to that for the second semester, lots of our schools are going to gain back the 2, 3, 4, and 5 points that they lost on this report card. And remember, we got 28 schools that are knocking on the door for the next star level. So that's going to be a real win if we can maintain that momentum to the end of the year. We know we're moving in the right direction with staffing shortages and transportation. It still played a role, however, in some of our opportunities. It's still lagging. Just a reminder, we were here before you March of last year. We're here in early January. That's better. It's not good enough, but it's better, right? And so the state is promising us next year that we'll even get data much earlier so we can get it to our schools earlier so that we can impact results better. But we're moving in the right direction. We don't have any item analysis yet. We do get evidence statements and some standards, but we're hoping that the state is at some point going to move towards giving us a true item analysis on the tests. And as we've kind of mentioned to you, high school assessments are going to stabilize. We showed you some data. It's improving. We are fighting, though, a new thing, just a reminder to this team that the state has decided that the MCAP ELA test and the MCAP Algebra 1 test are no longer required for graduation. So it's kind of a give and take. So they're stabilizing, but they're no longer required for graduation. So we are a little worried about where that kind of is going to land, over time, because it's an important part of the high school report card. Where are we going? Spring's busy. We're already giving the WIDA access test to our English learners. That will end in February. We just had a meeting about it today, in fact. And so we're already off to the races with MCAP testing. We'll be giving our climate survey, the state climate survey, in March and April. Schools have choice as to when they give that. We'll give the 5th grade and 8th grade science assessment in March. We're going to be giving the SAT and the PSAT to all of our 10th and 11th graders. Super excited about that as part of our CCR initiative. And then in May, the craziness just starts. And so we'll be giving English 10, algebra, all the English language assessments, the government, social studies 8. We're giving LS MESA, just to remember, LS MESA is life science, Maryland Integrated Science Assessment, think biology. Obviously, the first 2 weeks or 3 weeks are advanced placement and international baccalaureate tests. And we have lots of our CTE students taking their certification tests in May as well. So May's a little crazy, really important, but a little crazy. And then, as I just mentioned, we're being told by the state that we're going to get this data earlier, and hopefully we'll get our report card even earlier than yes, knock on wood. So what's coming? We know that this data will impact our school improvement plans. This amazing team to my right have been busier than they've ever been in years and years and years. And so we've been actually going out to schools tremendously, helping them set targets, helping them understand their what are called AMOs, which is, the target that the state sets for them in each of the rooms. And we've been doing that feverishly for months. We know that we're developing a new strategic plan. Along with that strategic plan will come a scorecard, and that will be our guide. We will know exactly where we are and how we're going to get to where we want to be. Dr. Bedell has repeatedly said we're not going to have any 1-star and 2-star schools in this district, and that's what we're going to do from now moving forward. And we certainly want the other schools to move up. You saw that you get a percentile rank, right? We don't want anybody to be satisfied with whatever it is, 72% better. If you're 72% better, then let's get to be 75% better, right? Let's get to be 80% better. And we know that we want to be a top 5 school district in the state, and we showed you we're within a few points of that. We can do that. We got this. We really do. And a lot of things are coming together very nicely, and we're really excited about it. And with that, we'll be happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you. So we do have some lights. Ms. Crocodile.
Thank you. And thank you for the data share. I know it's no easy task. I have a couple questions and observations. And so questions first would be, how many of our students and educators complete the climate survey? Like when I'm looking at that number, regardless of how the state is ranking us, I think it's important for me to know what's the percentage of our participation rate, because that is something that we here on the dais can affect along with you guys by encouraging that, by making people understand the consequence to not completing the survey and how that translates to them. Do we know?
Yeah, Ms. Crocodile, thank you. It's an excellent question. So what you need to recognize is the state actually treats the climate survey as a test. So it's a secure document. We do formal training. We are held accountable for testing all students and giving the survey to all educators. So our percent, we can get you the exact percent, but it is extremely high. I don't know if any of you know it off the top of your head, but I know you're looking it up. I
Okay.
can see Anna just clicking her way over there. So it is about the same percentage participation rate as we would have on any given state assessment, because that's how it's treated.
Oh, okay.
And so it is well above 90%, 95.
You do?
Yeah. So it is the vast majority, including the expectations to do makeups. So just like if I miss the English 10 test, the expectation is you make it up. If you missed the survey, you make it up.
Gotcha. And then, you learn something new every day. I honestly, I think of the word survey. I guess
Yep.
maybe it's the terminology.
Yep. Or you think voluntary,
is
or
very
you do it at your own
broad.
time. Yes.
Yeah, is very
Yes. No.
broad. So I think a survey, and I think, well, how many do we actually get responding? Because I know
Right.
when we do certain
Yeah.
surveys,
Our
yeah,
schools
looking
actually
at
schedule
that.
it like a test. So there is a day and a
Gotcha.
time, and that is the order of business for that particular period.
And then I just want to recognize, the data lags clearly put us at a disadvantage that we do not have control over. So if we're getting the preliminary embargoed, data, and then actuals in August, I can't accommodate for any adjustments from a budgetary perspective, because that is already sailed for that year. I cannot beef up resources in a particular environment or particular group very easily and readily in response to that data when we do get it. And then the data we do get doesn't give us the granularity that we need to instruct and lead certain type of pedagogical changes. I probably messed up that word there, but moving along. I recognize all of that. That being said, I've seen, as a parent of two kids who have graduated, I've gone through many iterations of these types of tests, and all the way until the point till they announced the new test, it was the greatest thing. And then when they announced the new test, they tell you how we should not have been paying attention all along because it was messed up. And then I see these houses that are very complex, that have these exceptions, but no exceptions over here. We have elementaries, especially when I look at those numbers, and I know that we have integrated classrooms. So there's a percentage of our students who cannot, due to their limitations, achieve all of the ands in health, in et cetera, because they're receiving different instruction that is helpful for them. So is there methodology outside of the state of Maryland that substantiates and brings some rationale and science to what we are having to do in general with these numbers? Like, are we using proven things? Is this MCAP something that we created, or something that we recognized had value and adapted for Maryland? And similarly, this methodology of these points, and if it's sunny, you get this, and if it's not so sunny, you get that. If it's a cloudy day, I kind of feel like we're in there. But could you share a little bit about
Sure.
that methodology and that higher level? Because I think it's helpful for us to advocate for our district if we have an understanding of where this comes from, because I
Sure.
always feel like it's this mythical thing, and
So not mythical.
it's like the wizard, and there's
Yeah,
these things
so
behind it, right?
What you are articulating, Ms. Corcadell, is the fact that it is complex, right? It's complex for schools to understand, teachers to understand, administrators to understand. I mean, we have to peel it back as well. So what I will point to is, the old accountability system was based 100% on test scores. And Maryland made a very definitive decision when ESSA came out from the federal government that they said, we no longer want everything based on test scores. We want to include some other factors, to your point, some, a different methodology. And so that's where we said, well, we want students to have opportunities. That's the access room, right? We want to make sure that kids are getting what they will call a well-rounded education, right? Where they knew that not in this district, right? But in other districts, things were going by the wayside that the state was not comfortable with. So that's why you see things like fine arts, right, in there, because they wanted students to have certain experiences. And then you see credit for a well-rounded education, because not only do we want you to be exposed to it, we actually want you to do well in it. We want you to pass, right? And so the idea was really to spread the wealth. That's how I would describe it to you. So when the state did this, they obviously made a task force and made a work group. And how it compares to other states, I don't know. What I do know is that there was, they wanted to get away from, you have to pass the test to do well on the state accountability system. So they wanted to do growth, because if you're getting better, that's positive, and they wanted to reward schools for that, right? And if your average is going up, they wanted to reward schools for that. So they really tried to look at a number of different ways to kind of score, if you will, a school. From a reliability standpoint, I mean, attendance is very reliable. We do deep data dives, every executive team, and we know that chronic attendance, usually it's number 1 or 2 in how it's impacting our data. So it's very reliable. We know that schools that can improve that room on the report card will probably see dividends in other rooms equally as well. So not only are they going to get more points in the chronic attendance room, they're going to get points in some other rooms, because we know the importance of that. And so they really kind of took a more of a well-rounded approach to it. Is it too complex or not? I don't know. Do I like the share the wealth methodology much better than just you pass the test or you don't? I do. I certainly like that approach better. Will it change anytime soon? I'm not expecting that. There's no conversations going on about Maryland revisiting or re-looking at the methodology. So I think we kind of have what we have, and we work really well with schools to try to figure out where can you focus your efforts to kind of get the most bang for buck, And it's not always the room with the lowest points, by the way. It just depends on the dynamics going on in a school and where they can get some more points for the report card.
And then lastly, based on that information, I look at CCR, or College and Career Readiness. And we know that the interim standards, they're adequate, they're working, we're all working in them, we're all comfortable with them. But the idea of recognition of the career path that does not include college. I see IB up there. I see our magnet. I see some of our magnet programs, programmatics. They have limited capacity, so the access is limited to the percentage of students who can benefit from it. We have a limited number of seats, even in our AP courses. And although we're untangling how you qualify to get there, we still have to address the percentage of students who could even access it in theory, as a percentage of a whole. When I'm seeing those numbers there in SATs that I know that was reported to this board years ago, that colleges are no longer keeping an eye on. So therefore students are less and less apt to participate in them and perform well in them, because they know they can just simply not use them. They can choose to not submit them, so to speak, as part of their profile. And it is very limited. I'm looking at that, and that is not the direction I am seeing the blueprint taking us with the college and career readiness in its performance. Because those percentages of those MCAP and what those requirements for Algebra 1 are going to be has virtually well over half of the students in the state not able to comply. Our remediation requirements are very heavy financially and on our FTE side of a burden, and can limit those career opportunities. Are we recognizing any of our career paths as it's a good school because we're supporting those things equally? Is there any movement to get us to where we will be in alignment with where we're probably going to be in the next 18 months with the new CCR standards? Because this, although this house looks pretty stable, and you said there's no movement on it, what I'm seeing in our what we're going to be required in Blueprint actually is. Could you explain, or am I disconnecting it, or not making a connection, or
So
am I
it's-
making a
it's
connection?
It's a good
'Cause,
news, bad
yeah.
news scenario, right?
Yeah.
And the good news is that for the first time, when the new state accountability system came out, schools can get credit for the CT, the way we put up there, the CTE concentrators. So the good news is that schools do get credit for students that are enrolled in a CTE concentrator. But to your point, the majority of CCR currently is kind of geared towards that college readiness. So there's more room to grow. So that's where Blueprint comes in. We are advocating, I can't tell you how much we're advocating. We're advocating so much that the state really needs to greatly expand the definition of college and career readiness. And then if they will do that, or when they do that, we would hope then that they would put some of those criteria into the ESSA accountability so that we get that alignment that you're referring to, right? We need CCR to be currently it's English 10, Algebra 1, and SAT math. We know that they're going to expand that, but we don't know exactly how. But when they do, we're advocating that gets aligned, right? The state accountability system for CCR is in direct alignment to what the Blueprint is expecting all of us to do with those pathways that we want kids to be future ready, as Dr. Bedell talks about all the time.
Well, as one of those testifiers over the last several
There you go.
weeks, and the Friday before the holiday break, sitting in the morning meeting with AI, listening in on those meetings with AIB, I completely. But the good news is I think we're all echoing it. I've heard every single partner.
Yep.
Extra shout out to Kirk in workforce development, for example. He so well represented us, as did Dr. Bedell and many others. And every single one of us is playing a key role there. But it's helpful for me to put my district in perspective to where we are, what direction we're taking, and then what these numbers mean to us in the here and now, so that we're not trying to put Band-Aids on when we know that we need to push forward a little bit more strategically. I think we could all probably geek out up here on the data and everything, with all of us being oriented. So I will table the rest of it for the for the next opportunity. But thank you very much. It's very helpful. And I know you guys are working so hard. And I look forward to a day when, we do get data that is something that we can use to improve the students in the here and now, not
Getting
2
better.
years later
Yep.
after their window to really learn and understand reading has come and gone, for example. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Ellis.
Thank you. I'm going to touch on a bit of what Ms. Corkadell was talking about and asking about. So data is obviously very important. And I know you guys are passionate about it. I've always been very vocal about being concerned about just how focused we are on data, because I'm concerned, as many parents have expressed, and it was one of the number one issues when I was on the campaign trail, about how it impacts the experience in the classroom. And so, particularly when we're talking about testing, and trying to make those numbers in each of those rooms what we want them to be, how does that actually impact the experience for the student, right? So, the absenteeism rate could potentially be greatly impacted by enhancing the meaningfulness of that time spent in the classroom. And the overall physical and mental well-being of a student, so that they're prepared to come to school. So there are a lot of factors. So I was struck by watching this whole presentation, by the numbers that we're focused on. We've got the scorecard, which is this, you presented it in a house that was created in the state of Maryland, right?
Mhm.
And then we have the MCAP, Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program, again, something created in Maryland. And so I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, to ask you to critique the quality of the tests that are being given in the state, but that could be a factor. And I do worry about how hard we might be trying to achieve certain numbers on a test that I don't know the actual meaningfulness of the tests. Of course, we want our students to excel in math. And of course, we want our students to excel in language arts and all of the core subjects and the arts and everything else. Another thing that struck me was I would have to sit for a while to look at these numbers more closely, but on a glance, I saw that there are some schools that scored pretty darn high on the scorecard who weren't necessarily particularly high on the MCAP, on the testing. And so I do appreciate that there is more going into the scorecard than just testing. But I'm just I know I'm just spitting out a lot of sort of philosophy about what we should be looking at with our students. But based on that, I just wonder, particularly Dr. Bedell, if you can speak to what this means for what's happening in the classroom, and what should we be doing, in your opinion, to adjust to try and make the rooms look the way we want them to look.
Why are you putting me on the spot like this? I think I've been very vocal in my position on this. I question whether what is being presented to our students truly gives us a true indication of what they are able to do and know. And I've had this conversation not only here in the state of Maryland, I've had this conversation in the state of Missouri. I've seen data, just like you look at some of the percentages of the number of students who are able to pass the math assessment in this state. People will lose their mind over those scores, that the highest school district, I think, scored 28% or something. The average across the state is 23%. I really legitimately find it hard to believe that 77% of our kids can't do math. I know that we have a far more percentage of kids than what those high school scores show that leave our high schools and go on to college, and they do very well, right? And so I think part of it is to what Jason Dykstra said earlier, when there's not necessarily skin in the game, I'm not certain that we're getting a true depiction of where our kids are. And I've said this to you all as a school board last year. I believe we have a responsibility to work with our community to truly look at what experiences we want our kids to have. What do we all believe 100% our kids should be able to know and do upon graduating out of Anne Arundel County? And because I'll look at the math scores, but then when you go and you look at math SAT scores, there is no link, right? You could see more kids doing much better on the SAT math than what's happening on the state scores, because they understand there's more implications to it. And so that, I think, is for us to really sit back as a team and to figure out what experiences do we want our kids to have? And I think we'll talk a lot about that in the profile of a student that we build out in the strategic plan. Students are telling us what it is that they believe that we should have them prepared to do when they graduate. And I do think that it is a matter of probably looking more at some of the norm reference performance to truly see how our kids are performing on some of these more standardized assessments like SAT, AP, IB, ASVAB, whatever those other indicators are, that I think could give us a bigger picture of where our kids are and not just be confined to the criterion reference aspect of the MCAP. Now, with that being said, we have to perform on MCAP,
right,
because that's how our school district gets its accountability ratings, right? And so it's just one of those things that we have to continue to work on, figuring out how we grow and work on that. But I think there are far many other ways that we can look at how our kids are performing. And Arundel County has a high percentage of students who move on and they're going into career and college readiness opportunities. But a lot of our kids also go into a 2 or 4 year college and university that I'm not certain those universities are taking those scores into account when you look at 20-something% of kids passing a math state assessment.
So I get that that could account for some of the discrepancy in the scores on the MCAP versus, say, the SAT. But I also question the quality of the test. Is the MCAP a reasonable assessment? Is it and again, I guess I think you largely answered my question in the way that I asked it, Dr. Bedell, and I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you to give me your opinion of the actual MCAP itself. But
because
it has to be put out there.
Because Ms. Ellis, part of what's hard about it is I don't have item analysis data to really determine
Understood. Right.
if we're going wrong about how we're aligning standards to the curriculum or if it's a pedagogical issue. That is a huge component that is missing that makes it really hard for me to answer the question in the way that you want me to
Understood. Answer it. I did not expect you to have an answer as far as the actual content of the test. It's just a valid point that I think needs to be stated and put out there. I've given testimony a couple of times on what largely put me here in this seat was a standardized test that my daughter took in the 9th grade, and it was for English language arts, and it was largely there were questions that were being graded objectively that were very subjective, right? And so I had concerns about the quality of the test itself. And so I think I would be curious, and her English teacher sat down with me privately and told me what she thought of that test, and it wasn't very great. This was years ago. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot right now, but that can be a valid concern. Like, do we really want our students doing well on this? Like, does it really matter if it's not an accurate assessment of what the student's knowledge and skills are? So I would be curious for teachers who have seen and taken, the MCAP to, I'd be curious to hear opinions on that. I'm not going to get that tonight. I understand that, but it's just.
We're probably more aligned than you think, but I'm not going to go any further than that.
I wouldn't expect
record.
you to. Thank you.
Dr. Tobin.
Thank you. So first of all, I would like to give a shout out to Annapolis Elementary and the principal, Ms. Hartford. That's astounding to raise your ratings by 2 stars. And that, I believe, represents some extraordinary work. I also wanted to mention, I have often heard feedback. I was thinking about the question around the climate survey, especially from families with younger kids who indicate that the kids really don't understand half of what's in that. And that the way it's written, and again, this is not to anybody here, because I presume it comes from the place these things come from.
That's the place.
That the language of it is often opaque to young children. So that raises, those are some anecdotal things I have been told.
Yeah, Dr. Tobin, great question. So for elementary, it starts in 5th grade
Right.
by design.
Right.
And what the state has done, to their credit, is if you go on the state website, they actually have the questions available for folks to look at. They're not the exact questions.
Right.
They're released questions from prior climate
Right.
surveys, so that you can see, to your point, what language are they using with,
Right.
the elementary, middle school kids? What language are they using with the high school kids in those 4 different areas that Ms. Hall kind of referenced? So it's more transparent,
Right.
which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Are we using the most student-friendly language that we could on a state survey? Maybe not.
Yeah.
But I think it's moving in the right direction.
And that's really why I raise it. I hope there's an awareness of that as these things evolve. They always do. I do think, as we get into the question of what is a valid way to assess what our students actually understand, what they've absorbed, these are some deeper questions that also go to things like grading, quite frankly. And I think these are, this has been said probably too much, but I think there's just no way around it. Coming out of COVID, we're sort of faced with some fairly profound transitions that we're going to have to navigate. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot that comes forward in the next period of time, not only around what these assessments are and are not assessing, because interestingly enough, a lot of the philosophy and research behind Blueprint, is exactly around those questions. And so it is pushing us to a sort of different place. I will say, in my mind, somewhat ironically, I certainly heard on the campaign trail myself, when I was first running for this office, a lot of concern about testing. Often the very same parents who raised those questions also would tell me they picked their district because of the great start, the great schools ranking. To which I said, well, you sort of, these are the measures we have right now. This is where we have to do the work. And I think that is something worth thinking about, because there's a kind of, if you'll forgive the term, educational project, I think, with the public about really what people understand their child's education to be and what they're looking for. And that gets us to what is, an authentic assessment, which is kind of the holy grail of education right now, in my understanding. So I hope we keep moving in that direction. Finally, one question, a couple of quick questions. First of all, the high school math, what are the thoughts on what prompted that move? I mean, the fact that we saw that number go up the way it did, other than, I guess, the same kids. I mean, I don't know how that worked, but
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly we're excited to see that. We're still unpacking that a little bit with the principals. We've had some folks, playing around with who takes the test when, whether
Right.
it's a 9th grade test or a 10th grade test. Again, the overall pass rates aren't great. I mean,
Right.
we're thrilled being second in the state, but they're not where, to Dr. Bedell's point, they're not kind of where we want them to
Right.
be. And so it's actually, Dr. Tobin, if we look back, they're actually more in line with more pre-COVID.
Okay.
And so, between now, they're not required for grad. There's just been so many changes.
Right.
It's a little hard to predict as to what we saw. But, again, it certainly comes down to schools, school improvement plans, and just being focused on, hey, we can do better than this.
Right.
And making it a focal point through strategies, through action steps, through monitoring, through feedback, and everything that these ladies do literally every day supporting schools. So it was great. We want to take that number, and whether we're number one or not, we just want that percentage rate to really get back
move.
to those pre-COVID days where we were at a much, much, much higher percentage.
And obviously next year it'll be exciting to see what a full year of Reveal Math
Correct.
at the elementary level can show us.
Correct.
And finally, just another pet of mine, as we're going through our first year of the dual language immersion, I would hope, and I'm sure it will be the case, that we'll be doing some real tracking of that cohort of students to see what we see. I mean, we know what the research tells us it should look like, but obviously we'll have to see if indeed we see the kind of trajectory that we would hope. So
we will absolutely look at that, Dr. Tillman, and then I will also share with the board that the state now gives us the opportunity to actually test students in Spanish. So there's requirements, right? You have to get instruction in Spanish. I mean, so there's requirements to it, but we now are able, if we think it's to the benefit of the student, right? If it's better for the student, we can actually test students in their native language in Spanish. And so that's a nice step in the right direction, in addition to the schools.
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Ms. Shohan.
First, thank you as always for the wonderful presentation. Very data rich. And I just wanted to point out again for the public listening to this presentation at home that may have read recent articles about this topic, what you said, the importance of not being careful when comparing this to last year. So I want to say it again. Be careful when you compare this to last year. This is apples and oranges, folks. And so it behooves everyone out there in the audience who feels some type of way about what they've seen in this most recent one to watch this presentation and to look at the opportunities and challenges slide in particular. I don't have any questions per se, because it was a lot of what I wanted to know was covered by previous colleagues' comments and questions. So I thank them for that. Saves my breath a little bit. But one thing I will say is, because I also on the campaign trail 5, 6+ years, whatever it was ago, I also heard from a myriad of people talking about teaching to the test. There's a lot of that. Mastery versus mastery of skills. The fact that the state has come to a little bit and removed some of this as graduation requirements, I then assume we will go into our own policies and align them with the state and not require that as well. You said it was algebra 1. There was one other one.
English 10.
And English 10. That's a step in the right direction. I was never a good test taker. It did not matter. It did not matter if I knew the material or not. I had massive test anxiety. I took the SAT 4 times, for example. My parents, God love them, and didn't do better on the 4th versus the first one. Why? Because I don't test well. So the fact that we're removing that barrier, I think, is great, because there's so many other ways, as we've said over and over tonight and in previous sessions, to test the true skills and abilities of a student. So I'm glad that the state is moving in the right direction. You can do away with the rest of them too, please. Just saying. And but I'm really grateful for this data, and I really look forward to next year and being able to really compare apples to apples, folks, on all of this. I think will be more eye-opening and more revealing than what we've seen here tonight. And I'm very grateful for all the work you do every day to crunch the numbers so we don't have to. My math is bad. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Ms. Stent.
So my question is about the 10 to 12 schools that are below grade in one, scoring 1 and 2. What are we going to do about them? And what is the strategic plan, I think was your word, that we have to get this, because most of them are the same schools that was last year. So what are we doing to try to get those schools up?
Yeah, so the curve hurt us, right? So we did increase the number of 2-star and 1-star schools. The 1-star school is our evening high school program. So that is, really kind of not a comprehensive school. It's a really set up to be a school for students where the day school is just not working for you. So Dr. Bedell and I have had many conversations around, what do we need to do? What really hurts evening high school is we have a lot of students that transfer there after not experiencing success in a comprehensive day school. And what really hurts them is those students don't graduate on time. They graduate, but they don't graduate on time. Well, if you don't graduate on time, you don't get points on the report card. So that's our 1-star school. The 2-star schools really, it really came down to the curve, Ms. Dent, to be very honest with you. When the state calculated growth the regular way, when we went back to the same chronic attendance rates, those schools that ended up being 2-star schools, that's where they need to focus their areas. So they're a priority. This team knows that if any of those, I think it's 12, yes, it's 12 schools. If any of those 12 schools need us, we're there. They get priority. They get priority from other departments and divisions that are sitting behind me as well, with respect to resources, with respect to professional development, with respect to we actually seek them out. So I'll give you an example. So in addition to the data that we share with schools down to the teacher and student level, what we will actually do for it, to your question, 2-star schools, is we will actually create unique, what I'll call one-pagers and specialized ESSA houses where they can see definitive. We kind of take the guesswork out of it for them so they can see exactly where to focus their efforts through a school improvement process. So when they set their goals, their targets, their action steps, their strategies, their monitoring tools, that it's definitely going to make a difference. And so we predict that the vast majority of them will come out if they just focus on growth and attendance. And there are a couple of other areas that we focus on, but what we really get to them to do, Ms. Dent, is focus on 2 or 3 rooms. We have a lot of schools that try to focus on all 9. It's hard for any school to focus on 9 different things and make a difference. And so we really help them prioritize where do you need to focus to get yourself out of that and get yourself into the 3-star land and then hopefully beyond. So they get specialized treatment.
Okay. So I know a lot of it is because of chronic attendance.
In those schools particularly.
Yes, I realize that. So we fixed majority of the transportation issues that are affecting those schools. So we've done a lot of work in that, to your point. But what other areas are you seeing outside of chronic absence? What would be, if I say rated out of the 9 blocks, what would be the number 2 for those particular schools? I'm only talking about the 2-star growth. And what does that mean? Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So any student, so a couple things happen, but the growth is any student in the school who has a previous test score. So your 4th and 5th graders, and then your 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. What we do is we compare those students to however they did the year prior. We look at every student in the state that had that same exact scale score, and then we compare them to how they did the following year, and then we kind of rank them. And so the number of students who then do better than their prior year, the school kind of reaps the benefit of that, and then they do an average, a student growth percentile, and then you can get more points. And so what we need to do is we need more students doing better on those tests so that the school will get more points. So it really is about moving the needle. You don't have to pass the test to get better. You just have to get better from where your starting point was. And so wherever your starting point was, we look at every other student in the state that was at that exact same starting point, and then we want to see you grow at least as much, if not more, than those other students in the state.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, Ms. Corkadell.
My apologies if time permits. I just had two quick things that my colleagues had brought up. When Dr. Tobin had asked about, and you had shared about the opportunity to administer the test in Spanish. That's one language of several that we have strong student presence. So the students that are, let's say, Korean language based, or coming from a whole host of different countries with different languages, of course, how are they just not counted? Is that my understanding? So they wouldn't
They take the test in English.
So they take the test in English and probably don't do very well. And then how do we, I guess I'm struggling here with each and every student, and then how we get so many kids discounted. What Miss Den had, her question about, like evening high school, for example, when you were bringing that up. That to me is a significant number of our students are not being counted. Well, if they're not being counted and they're not being calculated and they're not being tracked, how can we have schools that are being accountable to each and every student? And I'm talking about the state, not us at the local level. We backfill those gaps. But it seems pretty evident to me that some of these things that we're not able to get points for, these aren't divots, these aren't widgets, these are actual students.
Correct.
And so if I can't count them, then how can I quantify the resources? And how do I get the resources from the state if they're not calculated in the profiles as they're assessing us? It seems to me, is that something that I'm just missing a component that's not part of this? Because what I'm hearing is that we're just getting around, 50 years later, to addressing some of our one language of our bilingual students, after we have been trying to serve well. And our evening high school kids, we should be tracking their progress, and we should be getting points for that just because they experienced a skip year. Well, what if that was a health skip year? So all of a sudden, there's a percentage of our students that we're not tracking, or that the state isn't tracking, I should say, because we are, that we will not be able to as well resource as we can the students that we're tracking. Does that make sense to me?
Yeah, to some degree, Ms. Corkadell. It's an evolving process, to your point.
Very frustrating.
And we're excited that we're going to be able to test some of our English learners in their native language. Obviously, that's mostly for our newcomers. So there are waiver processes, but I would certainly hope and expect that we get to a point no different than what we just released with our website being available in however many languages, right? That there's going to be, I hope that that's where we're kind of moving towards, is we can put materials and resources and tests in a language that will help our English learners, regardless of their language, right? On the spot. And that technology, that the fact that we do online tests, that we're going to get to a point, and we're on that journey, that's where we're going to go, right? Because we do test all students. There is a waiver process for newcomers. So we certainly recognize that students who are brand new to the country, it's probably not in their best interest to take the test. So besides the language proficiency assessment, they don't have to take some of the other tests. And we're moving towards, testing some of our students in Spanish that we think would be in their best interest. We don't make them do that. It's a conscious choice that the teacher will make with the families. And I hope that we'll continue to expand that, to your point, right? And include other languages moving forward. We have online testing platforms So there should be of the technology to translate that if we need to, if that's in the best interest of students. And hopefully that's the journey that we're on.
Well, hopefully the state and the federal government will take a page book out of Anne Arundel, because
Yep.
once again, we're leading and having to fill gaps at our expense and cost, because honestly, there is absolutely no technological reason or otherwise outside of the will of the state being wanting to flesh this through. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to our partners. We've come a long way. You're absolutely correct. But when I look at how do we improve, and I look at, you know, where we're looking at, and just like Ms. Denham pointed out, I just see if the student is not, like, how do we measure that kid's genuine success? Because we can't. If they don't have the testing experience from that age, how on earth would they well perform in that testing environment? By the time, you know, they're going to be out the door and graduated before they're in that comfort zone. Particularly if they're not starting in the elementary level. I just find that to be greatly disadvantaged. And as I said, if you're not seen, you're not thought about. And if you're not participating in it, and we can't have participation in that, then how on earth are we going to genuinely give these students that opportunity of progress? Because we can't just do it in a vacuum here at the local level. We have to have that support. How can we quantify that? I saw the state released our numbers, and yay, we got a couple percentage points greater than last year, but doesn't even compare it with inflation, of course. But those are dollars that are not coming from the state, that are coming in for certain students, but not for all of them, because those are the numbers that they use to help us get funding, to help us get all of those programs and those resources, to give us those partnerships. And I really hope that somebody out there is paying attention to that, because we've got a lot of students that could definitely benefit, and I think would better be reflective of this grading system when people are shopping, I guess school shopping, for lack of a better term, based on some of it. Thank you guys so very much. I apologize to my colleagues, but this is really important. And it's also what we're having to deal with the legislation in part with Blueprint. And so I think it was a good conversation. But thank you guys.
Thank you, Ms. Corkadell. So I too would like to give a shout out to Park Elementary. I believe Park Elementary is my alma mater. I went to Park Elementary, grades 1, 2, 3, and I understand they became 4 stars, if I'm not mistaken, which is wonderful. So shout out to them. Again, I guess it's the teacher hat coming out. As a teacher, I can't tell you the number of tests that I administered. I administered many, many tests. And there's some barriers to success. Now, we've heard about some wonderful success stories here. There are some barriers, and I think part of the barriers, of course, it was mentioned about the absenteeism and transportation, which had a big impact on that. But the administration of the test also has an impact on what happens. I mean, I can remember giving these tests or administering these tests. The mindset of the student is critical to their success on that test. The mindset that I had as I administered that test was absolutely critical. And then I think the entire mindset of the entire staff is going to have a huge impact on that. When students know, and when there are really positive relationships between students and staff, there were many students, as I recall, who wouldn't do their best on a test because they didn't think it really mattered. Well, they do matter. And so I just thought I'd throw that out there. Mr. Dykstra, want to thank you so much. And this wonderful group of people that love data.
Yes, we do.
Well, Dr. Riddell's a data guy too. I don't know that I've ever been a data guy, but we thank you so much for the presentation. Absolutely marvelous.
Thank you for the opportunity.